Yes, I am Dean Coclin. I'm with a company called DigiCert, which probably none of you have heard of before. We own the website security business that used to be VeriSign. So if you're familiar with the VeriSign and certificates that are issued for websites, I always try to explain this to my father. If you go to a website and you see that little lock on the screen, we sell those locks to websites. So he said to me, "Oh, so you're like the locksmith?" I said, "Yeah, sort of, I guess." But we're now part of a bigger company now that, after purchasing that business from Symantec and VeriSign, it's now called DigiCert. We're based in Salt Lake City, Utah. And today I'm going to talk about a fairly broad topic, cybersecurity and IoT. It sounds like a lot, but I'm focusing specifically on what's going on in this industry. Now, in all honesty, I did not come from this industry. I did a lot of research in the last few months to get up to speed on what's going on in this industry. And hopefully you'll learn a little bit about how cybersecurity and this industry work together and sometimes don't work together. Now, before I start, I'll tell you a quick little story. I was cleaning out my basement a couple of weeks ago, and I found a box that said college and high school. I was afraid to open it, but I did. And I found this book here. It's called Megatrends. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this book. It was written in 1982. And it was a book that, at the time, was predicting what was going to happen in the future. So here we are, it's 2018. We are actually in the future of what this book was predicting at the time. So I thought it'd be interesting to look and see, what did they get right and what did they get wrong? And interestingly enough, it was given to me by my godmother, who wrote me a nice little dedication in here. And I saw her the other day and I thanked her for that. She's 80 years old now and doing very well. But what I thought was interesting in this book is that it got a lot of things right about the future, which in this book's time would probably have been around 1990, 2000, so we're already beyond the future here. But what this book said is interesting. It said that we would be moving from a national economy to a global economy. We'd be moving from centralization to decentralization, from institutional help to self-help. Nowadays, trying to get help on the phone is impossible. You've got to do it yourself. And people would be moving from the northern communities to southern communities in the United States, things like that. But one of the things I don't think this book or any book got right is what we see today. If you think about science fiction movies, the television shows around science fiction, Star Trek, Lost in Space, The Jetsons, popular shows that were there when I was growing up, one thing that they did not say, any of these things, was talking about something like we have today. A group of computers that are networked together, which we can use to get information. A worldwide web of computers that are used every day to gather information, to send information, and to communicate globally. It's amazing that no one ever predicted this. And why is that? Well, we use this internet in many different ways, and I think people thought that they could do these types of things without an interconnected set of computers in the past. You think about something like Star Trek, and they say, computer, do this, computer, do that. Well, it was all based on a mainframe computer. At least that's what they thought in their heads. Now we use the internet in many different ways, from personal use to corporate use every day. I know you know what we do every day. We do banking, we do business, we present, we order. All these types of things are done online with the internet. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is the Internet of Things, where things, things communicate with other things. It's the best way I can put it. We'll talk a little bit about what those things are in a moment. So here's a formal definition of the Internet of Things. So the internetworking, interconnected, physical devices, which could be vehicles, buildings, or other items, toys, that are embedded with some sort of electronics, some software, and some network connectivity to enable these objects to collect and exchange data. Now, there are many, many examples of these Internet of Things out there today, some of them which are shown in this picture. We're going to focus today on some Internet of Things around the toy world that specifically focuses on this industry. So, what are some of the benefits of things communicating over the internet? So most of these are things that you probably realize today. Accessing real-time information, getting software updates, accessing devices remotely. Maybe we have a thermostat in our house that we want to access. Transferring information between devices, getting remote control of some devices. And then, here's a word I just made up today. It's called autonomy. This is where devices can talk to each other autonomously. I tried to find this in the dictionary. It wasn't there, so I just wrote it here and figured I'd define it for you. So autonomy is where we have these devices that talk autonomously over the network. So, great. These all sound like great things. Well, what could go wrong? I mean, these are fantastic things. What could possibly go wrong here? Well, I'm sure you know, a lot can go wrong. A lot can go wrong here, and unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of things being done unscrupulously to different types of devices over the net. One big example is with vehicles. Vehicles now have autonomous capabilities. They have the ability to download software over the internet remotely, able to talk to each other. And unfortunately, this also invites a malicious element to do something negative here. And these are two publicized hacks that were there a couple of years ago around with Fiat Chrysler, where the Jeeps were hacked, and someone was able to get control of a Jeep and veer it off course. This, of course, was done in a demonstration mode. And then where BMW found a flaw in its cars where people could unlock doors remotely using the internet. So these are two common flaws. Of course, they've been fixed by now, but when you have interconnected devices, this, of course, invites malicious actors to try and do things in a negative way. Traffic signs are another example. In some cases, people just do this for fun. They make funny signs. But you can also see the case where someone does something negatively and says, you know, make a right at the next turn, and you come up to a detour or something, or a dead end, or a police incident. These are just done by people who want to get notoriety, but there are certainly malicious cases that can be used in these particular examples. A particular scary example is around medical devices. You know, if medical devices can be hacked, that could be a very negative thing for the people that have those negative devices, medical devices implanted in them. So think about, there was an episode, I think, of Homeland, a famous episode where someone was able to hack into the vice president's pacemaker and cause it to rapidly increase its heart rate. So, of course, we don't want to see anything like that. You have all these types of examples here, temperature settings on refrigerators, drug infusion pumps, X-rays that can be accessed. When we think about cybersecurity, we think about three things, they're very common. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are the CIA of cybersecurity. So confidentiality, very simply, means that two devices can communicate without a third party listening into what's going on in that device, and that's done via encryption. We have integrity, meaning that what I send to you is you receive what I've sent and nothing else. No one has modified that message in transit. And that's done with digital signatures. And the third one is availability. And availability means that I can access that resource anytime without it being loaded with requests from nefarious resources. In other words, there's no denial of service attack going on. I have access to that server all the time. Now, when it comes to toys, there are some very famous hacks around toys out there that I learned about recently. Now, quick disclaimer. I read some of these articles. Some of them may be a little bit dated. Maybe these hacks have been fixed by now. I fully expect that they are. But these were found at a time, and I thought I'd just let you know about them. In this particular case, this was an article from the Huffington Post. They said that 800,000 users were affected from this particular toy from Cloud Pets. So they had these devices, and personal information of people that access these devices was stored in a database online. It had nothing to do with the actual toy itself, but information from the toy was stored in an online database that was insanely easy to get access to. It was not encrypted, and if you knew where to look, you would actually find all the personal data of people who used this device. So this was as of February 2017, and it says, okay, it's talking about Christmas Day 2016, where information including the customer's login, the password, and the voice recordings were stored in an easily accessible device, internet access point. Now, this is a device where you give it to your child, and then you can remotely, with a phone or some other device, talk into it if you are away or overseas on an army trip, a military trip, or a business trip. You can send your child, excuse me, a message. Sorry. You can send your child a message, and it would be communicated over the pet. So very interesting technology, but security was not really taken into consideration in that particular design. So the takeaway here, think twice before you welcome any internet-connected devices into your home, particularly ones that affect your child. Now, another one that's pretty well known is called Kayla and Q, two robotic devices that were now hacked, and a demonstrated weakness was found in these devices. Now, this allowed people to communicate via a Bluetooth, your phone or some other Bluetooth-connected device, directly into the doll. This is because the doll did not have very good Bluetooth security. It allowed open access, and it allowed people to communicate with that doll remotely. It could even be someone that's not even located near the doll. So it had, some very basic security flaws, like a lack of basic security for Bluetooth encryption. Another interesting fact is that the user terms, the terms that you agree to when you get this doll means that anything that you say to this doll can be shared with advertisers. In addition, speech data from the doll was shared with a third party that does voice-to-speech recognition. You probably know it. It's called Nuance Communications, based in Massachusetts, that also can do anything they want with that data. Now, again, I don't know if this has been fixed or not, but this was a very recently reported flaw that got a lot of notoriety. Okay, so why are all these IoT devices insecure? And I'm not just talking about toys. There's many, many other types of IoT devices that are insecure. We're seeing this in consumer devices, specifically in consumer devices. Why? Consumer devices are rushed to market very quickly. They're done very cheaply. Price is a major consideration. And in particular, we're finding that most consumer organizations, not all, do not have the cybersecurity expertise necessary to protect these devices. I'm not going to lie to you. Cybersecurity is something that's very hard to do. So you need the right expertise to be able to do it. Now, as this has been pointed out, many manufacturers are now getting that expertise and realizing that cybersecurity is important to protect their consumers. So some of the typical scenarios you find is that a lot of these devices use factory default passwords. And this was used in a recent IoT attack with cameras. If you think about all the mobile cameras that people own at homes and businesses, those were secured with mobile passwords, and an attacker was able to compromise those cameras and then turn them into attack devices to create a denial of service attack. In other words, flood a website with packets such that it cannot respond to legitimate requests. This again is against availability that we talked about earlier. So those devices had to be updated to remove the default passwords. Another thing you're seeing is that devices don't have the ability to get patches for security. If a weakness is found, how do you update that doll? How do you update that robot? How do you update that smartwatch later on? Many of them did not have any encryption whatsoever, meaning that anyone can read that text in the clear. That goes against confidentiality. And there hasn't been any penetration testing excuse me, or vulnerability analysis of these devices before they're deployed. So I think Shai mentioned earlier, getting a device that works, yes, that's number one, but getting a device that's secure is number two. So specifically when you look at child-focused products, what are some of the risks that we see? So a lot of these toys we found have interconnected microphones, cameras, and remote controls. And they're also collecting private data. But who is that private data shared with? Who is it going to and for what purpose? Is that information clear? You have a way to opt out of it. You know, how long is that toy going to be used? Are security updates going to be available for that toy in the future? We have enough problems now with consumer devices that don't get security updates. What's going to happen to toys? You know, think of Windows XP. Windows XP has been discontinued for a long time. A lot of people still use it. There are no security updates available. So we need protections on these devices, things like eliminating the open Bluetooth access. That was one of the vulnerabilities we found in the Kayla and Q doll robots. Have it such that you have to press a button on the device to enable a Bluetooth access. Making sure that you use encryption when you communicate so you don't leak private data. Making physical access mandatory, having to push that button. And making explicit data usage disclosures. Saying it up front in a couple of paragraphs so that someone can read it and understand it, not buried 60 pages below. So one example I found was this child's smartwatch made by Omate and Nanoblock. It does come with 3G connectivity, and it's something that is really good for parents who can put this watch on their child and get location data from that watch to find out where they are at any time. Unfortunately, it could also be good for hackers to find out where that child is and possibly do something with that data. So it's really up to the parents to decide, is this something worth having to protect your child, but something that could also be, if it's not properly secured, and I'm not saying this device is not properly secured, but if it's not properly secured, is it something that you want to take a risk of maybe a hacker getting a hold of and getting that data for your child? So one of the things we looked at too is the Hello Barbie doll, which actually has done a very good job in security, and I'm not sure if this was the first release or subsequent releases, but when people looked at this doll and said, okay, well, what's going on here in terms of security? Number one, they are using SSL, which is an encryption protocol that everybody uses on the internet today, to encrypt the initial configuration from the doll to the server. It also uses what's called signed code. In other words, you develop a piece of code and you digitally sign it. And you're unable to modify this code without having the proper signature. So if you don't have the proper signature on this code, It cannot be modified, and therefore the doll will not run with any other third-party code. Second to last, we also have what's called PIN TLS certificates. This is a rather complex technical topic, but I'll just say that this prevents an attack between the doll and the server. The doll is always looking for a specific certificate on that server. It's pinned that certificate in its software, or in its firmware, actually. And so trying to put a man-in-the-middle attack in place here will not work. And I also found out that this doll does not connect to the internet to find answers. It has a pre-recorded set of answers. Now, it may not be as robust as something that does connect to the internet, but it's probably satisfactory for what your child needs to do. So kudos to Barbie here. Let's talk about 3 attack types that we see on the internet. They're probably not a surprise. I mean, you probably heard about demand ransom, where an attacker takes over your computer, encrypts all the data on your hard drive, and demands a ransom to get access to that. This can also be done with IoT devices as well. Stealing information, so basically taking information that may not be encrypted or somehow subverting the user to give up that information and then selling that information on the dark web. Seeing a lot of that going on. And then, of course, accessing remote devices. You've probably seen the video where there's a baby monitor in somebody's room and suddenly you hear a voice yelling at it from somewhere on the internet. And this is someone that has taken over that baby monitor device and is able to communicate with it remotely over the internet. Those are the 3 main attack types that we see. Now, in terms of laws and regulation, there's been a lot of discussion about that today. As you well know, the FTC and the COPA Act do fine for violations related to certain things that happen with these different types of devices. And in this particular example, VTech had a Kid Connect app, which apparently was violating children's privacy and was fined $650,000. And they also found that there was no direct notice to parents and no consent had been received for this particular device. In Germany, you have the Bundesnetzagentur, which is sort of like the FCC in the US. They have banned all smartwatches for kids, primarily because of data leakage issues. I just wanted to touch on this real quick. There's a lot more detail on this, but I'm not going to go into that for this particular talk. So some things to consider. First question you really want to ask yourself if you're making one of these devices is, should it be connected? Not, can it be connected? Should it be connected? Are the benefits for connecting that device greater than the risks connecting that device? And that's a real serious question, because if you're bringing something to market quickly, and you're not going to do all the things that I outlined previously around testing, vulnerabilities, encryption, etc., should it really be connected? And a lot of people think of security as attacks, and it really shouldn't be thought of as attacks. It should be thought of as an enabler and a necessity in this day and age. I was talking to some people at lunch about the changes that Google Chrome is making to its browser. Right now, when you go to a website that does not have a certificate, you don't see that little lock on the screen, you don't get any warning or anything like that. You might just get a little circle with a little eye in it. But the next release of Chrome is going to start saying not secure in the top left-hand side. So that's a big incentive for sites to use digital certificates to encrypt all their data. They're doing this because they want a 100% encrypted web. They're also seeing this as a necessity. So I think a lot of people will now start encrypting all their data on their websites because they don't want to see something on the top that says not secure. And think about how something could be used, not how you want it to be used. This is really important because assume people are going to do something bad with it, whether it's with a doll, with a camera, with an internet-connected baby monitor. We've already seen examples of how people do bad things with these devices. So use that assumption when you're building this device. Don't think about just how it can be used, but how it may be misused. So what's going on in industry and government? A couple things I want to just highlight here. There's a lot going on, but NIST, National Institutes of Standards in the United States, has come up with a framework for IoT security. It's actually a really nice checklist. I've put some references here on the bottom that you can access this document. But if you just Google NIST IoT Security Framework, you'll get to see this document, which really helps you evaluate cybersecurity implementations and risks. And then the OTA, which is the Online Trust Alliance, has a security and privacy trust framework with 4 key areas that I highlighted here. Again, this is a checklist. You can go through it and say, does your product do this, does it not do this, etc. A really nice resource if you're building products around cybersecurity. And this presentation, I think, will be available so you can have access to these links later on. Okay, so I think that's the end of my presentation around IoT and cybersecurity, and specifically focused around toys. I do have a quick word about our sponsor, which is DigiCert. Again, as I mentioned, we're based in Salt Lake City. We're a cybersecurity company, and we have three things that we just always talk about, which is we take care of our customers and our people, we do what's right for security, and we solve problems with technical innovation. Destiny. Here I am. Thank you very much.